Hi, I'm Misty Green, and welcome to the iLEAD YouTube channel. We're going to be planning for success by prioritizing skills and standards. If you're new to the field of education, welcome. You may have been handed your scope and sequence or your year at a glance, and you just don't know where to begin. This is a great starting place for you. You may be a veteran educator and you're like, my instructional planning practices are pretty solid, but I'm always looking to elevate or enhance my toolkit. This is also a great place for you. Our goal for today will be to gain a deeper understanding of why specific skills and standards should be prioritized and what specific skills and standards should be prioritized. We'll be hitting three big buckets: why prioritize, what to prioritize, and how to prioritize. Mike Mattos has done a lot of work in the area of priority standards. He said that in order for us to prioritize standards and really provide students with what they need, we must get very clear on exactly what all students must learn in a course or grade level so that they are better prepared. Get this, not just for your test or your demonstration of learning for that particular day, or even for just your content area. Mike says so that students are better prepared for next year and beyond. Priority standards and prioritization of skills and standards isn't just relevant for your current content area or grade level. No. We prioritize to ensure that we're providing students with the best path toward academic success. We should prioritize standards. Why? I want you to think about the instructional minutes that you have with every student. So secondary, you might be talking about blocks or periods. If you're elementary, you might be a triad or departmentalized, or you might be self-contained. You still will have time constraints as it relates to how many minutes of instruction you will have per day, okay? And I also want you to think about how many minutes do you actually have within your school day, your school week, to plan instruction. We prioritize standards so that we're maximizing our instructional planning and delivery time. In doing so, we ensure that we're doing due diligence to scaffold our students for success. Again, not just for one test date or one formative assessment, but for that year and beyond. If we expect students to learn skills that will support them in other content areas, so cross-curricular or convergence, skills that will scaffold them toward mastery of readiness standards. So there'll be times when you'll hear a lot of conversations focused on, oh, these are the heavy hitters, these are the readiness standards. Yes, we know they're going to be assessed, but there are some essential skills that kids must master before they can be successful on that particular skill. So we have to scaffold them toward mastery. If we expect students to learn skills that are required to be mastered by the end of year, then what? Then we must prioritize standards. Not we can, not we could, not we should. We must prioritize standards to maximize instructional planning and delivery time. So you're doing due diligence to yourself with your own planning minutes and also to your students. And we must prioritize standards to ensure that students are prepared for, yes, their most upcoming formative or demonstration of learning, but also for those heavy hitting assessments at the end of the year and then for the next grade level. We're talking about prioritization, not elimination. I want you to think about your year at a glance or your scope and sequence. I want you to think about the amount of standards that are included. The reality is you do not have enough instructional minutes to give every one of those standards their own time. You don't have it. What you do have is the ability to really identify the skills that are complex or comprehensive and that deserve the greatest emphasis in both instruction and an assessment. And I'm going to go back to and your planning time. When we think about priority skills and standards, it's important that we're able to identify The reason why we prioritize skills and standards is just for yourself to maximize your planning minutes, but really to create that path toward success for your students. Again, not focusing just on one grade level, one course assessment, one content area, but it's what's current and it's what's coming. It's ensuring that students are prepared for what's to come. We've now addressed why we prioritize. Let's now dive into what to prioritize. Larry Ainsworth has also done a lot of work with priority standards, and he suggests that priority standards are a carefully selected subset, group, small cluster of the total list of grade-specific and course-specific standards within each content area that students must know and be able to do by the end of the school year so that they are prepared for the next grade or course. Again, yes, we want to ensure they're successful at the end of the year, but we're also looking at so that they're going to be successful or prepared for the next course or next grade level. If we were to stay within the realm of, hey, every standard can get its own due time, we're going to teach one standard a day, and that's how we're going to pace out our pacing calendars, one standard a day, you're going to miss a lot of important skills. It's essential that you go back to those two C's, complex and comprehensive, and that you extract that subset. What are those heavy hitting standards that are critical for your current course or grade level and that you know will scaffold your students for success in the future? Two big ways to look at it would be those standards that we know have been assessed frequently on state created exams, and those standards that we know have historically been low performing. And here's a question just to ponder. If you're teaching the standard the same way every year, you have for the past 10 years, and you're getting the same result at the end of the year on your end of year assessments or even on those interim assessments that maybe your district or your campus creates, I think it's time to step back and really begin to look at how are we planning? How are we folding in standards? How are we tapping standards? How are we connecting skills together to really maximize our instructional delivery time? I want you to think about your at a glance. I want you to get a visual in your head. There are a lot of standards there, specifically if you're a reading teacher. There are a plethora of standards. Again, there is absolutely no way you can teach every content grade level standard in isolation. You cannot attribute one day to each standard. It's not going to happen. If you were to do that, Mike Mattos says that we would go from a K-12 span to K-22. I don't know about you, but I'm good with K-12. K-22, I don't think I'd still be in this field. So again, thinking about what Larry Ainsworth said, a subset, a carefully selected group of standards that will represent your priority standards. Now again, you are not eliminating standards. There's no way that you're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. No, you're finding a way to fold in those other skills, those essential skills, those scaffolds and supports into your priority standards. Ainsworth's criteria for prioritizing skills and standards based on 4 big buckets: endurance, skills that will be relevant beyond a single test date, leveraged on exam. We know they're going to be assessed. They've been assessed multiple times in the past. Prerequisite skills, knowledge and skills necessary for the next grade level of instruction, and convergent skills. You heard me mention that just a moment ago. Valuable skills across content, cross-curricular connections. They're going to impact multiple standards within a grade level. So I want you to be mindful of this particular image and Ainsworth's criteria for prioritizing standards. Now, thinking about what we're talking about in this moment, we're talking about planning for the upcoming lessons, planning for the upcoming units, forward planning, planning with the end in mind. You're identifying the big ideas that students should master, anchored back to those high leverage items. Remember, complex and comprehensive. Determining what will be assessed at the end of the year, and then considering how the priority standards will be assessed. That's twofold. Identifying the big ideas that students must master, and then considering how the priority standards will be assessed. Let me go to that middle bucket. Determining what will be assessed at the end of the year, but you still have to consider how the priority standard will be assessed. That's a critical step in your forward planning phase. Here's your reflection. When we prioritize, how do we decide what learning is most essential? And what criteria determines the standards that will be prioritized? Remember, for number one, comprehensive skills, important for one test date and beyond, not just for that one specific assessment, but beyond. Can you fold other skills into that skill? Will it scaffold students for continued success? And then for that next bucket, the criteria, I want you to be mindful of Larry Ainsworth's 4 steps. We can go back to it one more time just so that you get the visual. Endurance, leveraged on exams, prerequisites, and convergence. What about all those other standards? I want you to think about when I said we're not eliminating standards, we're prioritizing. Standards that support, connect to, or enhance the priority standards that are taught within the context of the priorities. Think about comprehensive. Can they fit into the lesson of a priority standard? Let's think about inference. If you're an RLA teacher, in order to infer, it's critical that I'm able to identify important text evidence and do away with distractors. So you could say that text evidence is an important skill to fold into inference. So every time you're hitting inference, you should be including text evidence. And number 3, do not receive the same degree of instruction and assessment emphasis as the priority standards do. So what about all those other standards? We're not eliminating them. We're going to spiral them in. We're going to continue developing them, whether it's through small groups, whether it's through collaborative learning opportunities. You're going to couple them with the priority standard. Think about the example I just gave you when it came to text evidence and inference. You're going to use them in center work or in activities in center stations. But remember, when you're pushing them out to a center, ensure you have some element of accountability, or you're going to tap them. That's the phrase I like to use, tap them. Every opportunity you get during your teacher model, tap those standards. Let's address the misconceptions. Priority standards are always and only readiness standards. Absolutely not. More times than not, that is correct. More times than not, a priority standard will be a readiness standard, but there will be times when a supporting standard will be a priority standard. This, more times than not, occurs during the beginning of the year. By the middle of the year and toward your last semester, your end of the year, at that point, typically your priority standards will be your readiness, but there are times specifically in the beginning of the year that supporting standards will be a priority standard, because without mastery of those skills, some of those supporting standards, there's no way that a student will be successful with a readiness standard. Priority standards are always taught before any other standard within a unit. There are times when priority standards will be taught after supporting standards, specifically when the supporting standard is a prerequisite skill to the priority standard. You heard me mention that in our top bucket. That's why we cannot say that priority standards are always and only readiness skills. There are times that the priority standard will need to be taught after a prerequisite skill or a supporting standard. All priority standards will be assessed on end-of-year district or state assessments. Though most priority standards are assessed on end-of-year district or state assessments, they are not all assessed in that way. Supporting standards can never be a priority standard. In some instances, supporting standards will be a priority standard. Often this occurs as a scaffold to future learning and mastery of high frequency, historically performing low standards. But there are times when supporting standards will be a priority standard. It's also important to note that there are times, if you really begin to look at your state assessments, that you will see that some of your supporting standards are in fact assessed on those end of year exams. Now we're going to be shifting into how to prioritize. Remember Ainsworth's criteria for prioritizing skills and standards. Endurance, meaning for that test date and beyond. Leveraged on exam, you know that they've been historically assessed. Prerequisite skills, skills that are necessary for success on the next piece of learning. And convergence, skills that are cross-curricular. They connect to different content areas. The process to identify prioritized skills and standards. You're first going to look at that big group of standards, your year at a glance or your scope and sequence, your yearly standards. You're then going to make certain that you identify what standards must be mastered by the end of the year. The current unit's focus. So it's twofold. You can look at either we've identified why we prioritized and we dove into what to prioritize. Now we're going to be looking at how to prioritize. And thinking about how to prioritize, it's essential that you're mindful of those 4 particular criteria that Ainsworth mentioned. Endurance. That means they're important for this year and beyond. Leveraged on exam. You know that they're going to be assessed at the end of the year. Prerequisite skills. They're necessary for learning that is to come. And convergence. Those skills that will support students across content areas. There's a process to also prioritizing skills and standards that anchors back to the curriculum documents that you have at your fingertips. I want you to think about your YAG or your year at a glance, your scope and sequence, or even your yearly standards. I want you to be mindful of what standards must be mastered by the end of the year. And also drill down a little bit deeper, make it bite-sized. Think about your upcoming unit. What's the unit's focus and what skills or standards support that focus? Next, identify the end of year frequency distribution. In Texas, you can lean into lead forward. It's a great support for this. What does that mean? You want to identify how frequently a specific standard or skill will be assessed on your end of year state designed exams. The frequency by which standards will be assessed at the end of the year is critical to ensuring that your students are truly set up for success on that assessment. And then the end of unit or end of year assessment. What standards must be mastered by the end of year? But I also want you to make it bite-sized. What standards must be mastered by the end of the unit? Now let's tie it all together. This was part 1 of a 3-part series. In this particular learning, we were able to dive into identifying priority standards. What are we going to remember about that? The priority standards, we know it will be tested. We have to identify how often and when it will be tested. Is it required for the next phase of learning? And what guided this decision? Was it your district scope and sequence, your YAG, or your state assessment? Join me for part 2 of this particular series, which will be unpacking those standards and deconstructing those standards. Here's your call to action. Be intentional about your planning practices. Create a crosswalk between what is already being done and how can it be enhanced by embracing the double pedal. If you're unfamiliar with embracing the double pedal, I urge you to watch my YouTube video or listen to the podcast about embracing something new, something difficult, and something challenging to enhance your current toolkit. Provide the context necessary to help others embrace the value of prioritizing standards. And model the practice over and over again using your district's curriculum documents. And be patient with yourself and with others. And if you're an instructional leader, support, support, support those around you. Until next time, thank you for joining me.